Thank you very much, Lena, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to the first annual Salmon Day. So, a big round of applause for all of you for coming out. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here as well. And as Lena mentioned, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation, part of the Coast Salish shared territories. And we certainly acknowledge that they are as well partners with the conservation and protection of salmon, not only in the Fraser but in all of British Columbia. My name is Finn Donnelly. I'm the Parliamentary Secretary for Watershed Restoration. As Lena mentioned, with the Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, it's a new ministry, and I'm the first ever Watershed Restoration Parliamentary Secretary. So I think it shows the emphasis that our government is putting on the need to address these issues. While salmon often are in federal jurisdiction, in watersheds like this, they're in provincial jurisdiction. So it really is a shared opportunity and responsibility for two senior agencies and levels of government to work together, along with First Nations, regional governments, city governments, and others, NGOs. I know we were supposed to have Councillor Chaffee here to say a few words. He is very concerned about salmon and bringing salmon back into his nation, into his territory, into this area. So I'd like to acknowledge his efforts for what he has done. And I understand Tlahatam means to be invited in the Hulkamanum language. So in the spirit of such an invitation, I thank the Coquitlam First Nation, along with the event organizers, Watershed Watch, Salmon Society, Resilient Waters, and UBC, for inviting me here to speak to you today. And I'd also like to acknowledge our speakers. We've just heard from Zach and Lena, and we'll soon hear from MP Ron McKinnon as well. So as BC's first ever Parliamentary Secretary for Watershed Restoration, my work involves conversations with communities about protecting and restoring watersheds on ecosystems that water sustains. I've often heard watersheds referred to as natural or green infrastructure, so I appreciate the work of Resilient Waters in creating natural infrastructure and helping communities adapt to a rapidly changing climate. And you know we're facing climate change when we're in one of the longest drought sessions that we've been in the province, as well as we're still in the largest wildfire season that the province has ever faced. So these challenges are going to continue and intensify as we go forward. So a little about flood infrastructure. And as Zach mentioned, traditional flood control structures can have a tremendously negative impact on fish habitat. And in large areas like the Lower Fraser, they have impacted many salmon runs. Both BC and the federal government recognize the significance and magnitude of fish passage in this stretch of river. These structures need to be updated in order to increase access to viable habitat for wild salmon and other species. And BC is eager to find ways to address this issue and restore fish passage to support healthy salmon runs. The province appreciates the stellar work of these organizations to improve fish passage, and please join me in applauding Resilient Waters, Watershed Watch Salmon Society, Tides Canada Initiatives Society, Tides Canada Foundation, and the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance. There you go. And I know there's so many other organizations that are a part of this project, and consultants and partners to make this happen. And as Lena has mentioned, Watershed Watch found that 156 flood control structures are responsible for blocking salmon access to about 1,500 kilometers of salmon habitat in the Fraser Valley. So these structures have been in place historically to manage flooding, but newer options exist, as Zach pointed out, and I really encourage you to check out these reader boards because they're excellent in showing the past and the hopefully future of where we're going. The newer options exist that would allow for fish passage, as these examples of action show. And the British Columbia Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, BC SRIF, funded Resilient Waters Phase 1, nearly $600,000 for their work to reopen large amounts of formerly high-value salmon habitat through upgrades to aging flood control infrastructure. So we've seen some good action underway in establishing fish-friendly flood structures in this stretch of water. For instance, the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy provided funding for culvert replacement on the Lower Agassiz Slough. The project will create a new fish-friendly floodgate to make 7.5 hectares of habitat available to overwintering juvenile salmon and other fish species. Another BC SRIF project of about $4.75 million, led by Ducks Unlimited Canada, is set to restore key Fraser River estuary tidal marsh habitat for Fraser River Chinook, coho, steelhead, sockeye, white sturgeon, and other BC fish populations. Make Way is another BC SRIF recipient and is using nearly $2.7 million to construct and restore 4 high priority areas that will reconnect fish with over 50 hectares of habitat. Out-migrating juvenile Chinook, Lower Fraser coho, and chum will benefit from improved access to historical spawning and rearing areas, and white sturgeon are expected to benefit from slough reconnections to the Fraser River. So I want to talk a little bit about nature-based solutions. And as Lena mentioned, the November 2021 atmospheric river floods demanded an emergency flood response in the interior and lower mainland to protect lives and fish, specifically wild salmon. After the event, the province embarked on a baseline study of the impacts of floods on fish, mainly wild salmon, in the interior and Lower Fraser as part of a larger habitat survey. The province has several medium to long-term nature-based solutions which could include shifts in distribution and concerns and in determining location of fish. The province is working to identify what culvert or infrastructure is being replaced now and in the future, determine which of these impacts fish, fish habitat, and fish passage, and ensure that they are replaced with fish-friendly structures. So that is part of our commitment, and we need Watershed Watch, Resilient Waters, Zach at UBC, and so many others to keep the province on that and to push us to accelerate that as much as possible, because there are so many competing priorities. And that's where you can play a role as well. And that's what events like this at Salmon Day are all about, is engaging you to lend your voice to their efforts so that they are able to get the funding to do the good work to allow these fish to come back and spawn and continue the cycle. Okay, I'm almost done. We have been increasing BC's preparedness and mitigation efforts since forming government, precisely because of the warnings from experts on flood hazards and the impacts of climate change. The province worked with Indigenous partners to write the BC Flood Strategy based on what we've heard from local governments, industry, academia, professional associations, non-government organizations, businesses, and the public. We aim to release a draft of that strategy this year with implementation shortly after. Simultaneously, we're also working on the bigger picture to enhance watershed health. BC's watersheds are the lifeblood of this province. That's why our government and the BC First Nations Water Table announced an unprecedented $100 million investment in March of this year to create the Watershed Security Fund. Together with First Nations, we are co-developing a watershed security strategy, addressing salmon issues and developing BC's first ever coastal marine strategy. In conclusion, We are recognizing Lower Fraser, which is an important rearing and overwintering habitat area for juvenile salmon. We are committed to ensuring that watersheds are respected and valued and support good quality water for communities and healthy, resilient ecosystems for species like wild salmon. We'll continue working with rights holders and others to protect and restore fish populations in watersheds and freshwater habitat. So, thank you again for inviting me here. I wish you have a great, fun, and engaging afternoon and learn something. And I again want to add, please add your voice to the work that these groups are doing to make the changes that we need to ensure that those salmon come back. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.